Welcome to Before Floor, the pregame edition of Five on the Floor, brought to you by the Five Reasons Sports Network. I'm your host, Jonathan, aka Three Piece Combo. I'm joined by the main man, Mr. Ethan J. Skolnick. How you doing today?
I'm good. Waiting for 7 games to end so we can figure out if they're going to be in the seventh seed or the sixth.
Yeah, crunch time coming down here this season. Miami Heat taking on the Toronto Raptors tonight, of course. But before that, as always, we want to thank a couple of our sponsors. And for that, make sure you guys like the video. Make sure you guys subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any South Florida sports news. Miami Heat, Dolphins, Canes are in the Final Four, so you want to make sure you check that out as well. But when it comes to daily fantasy, you want to go to prizepicks.com. And to maximize your money, you want to use the promo code 5. So spell that out, FIVE. We'll match your initial deposit up to $100. And that's literally 20 free plays if you think about the way it's done. So the way Prize Picks work, like I said, it's daily fantasy. So you don't have to worry about your players getting hurt. You just pick 3 or 4 players, pick if they'll go over or under on points, rebounds, assists. And if you hit on all 4, you make a lot of money. And they also have flex plays. So even if you get one of them wrong, your parlay isn't busted. You don't worry about losing money. You'll still make money even if you get 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3. So like I said, go to Prize Picks, use that promo code 5, FIVE, and we'll match your initial deposit up to $100. And since we have Ethan here, why don't you tell about our friends over at Mark Brown, PA?
Yeah, Mark Brown, our guy, big Miami Heat fan. And again, we do our new segment called On the Mark on 5 on the Floor now. Check Mark out. We always talk about the estate plan that he can help you with, but also he's a real estate attorney, and he can help you with real estate transactions. He can act as a seller representative. You can do contract review and preparation. He handles escrow disputes and also breach of contract. So if any of that sounds like something you may need, we know the real estate market is very confusing right now. Make sure you get the right attorney. I can tell you that Mark handled my last 2 closings on properties, and I would use him again if I ever get another property. So there we are. Go to markbrownpa.com. That's MARC, brownpa.com, or 954-566-5678.
To tonight's game. And before that, I kind of want to just talk about this Heat team overall. You know, every time it seems there is a path for us to kind of get ahead, bless you. It seems like there's a path for us to get ahead. Something seems to go wrong, right? Against the Brooklyn Nets, that was a game that we needed to handle, right? That would be a game that would have almost locked us into the 6th seed, kept us out of the play-in, and even given us that opportunity for the 5 seed. But now with that game being lost, us and not having the tiebreaker against the Brooklyn Nets, we have a much more uphill battle than we even did all season already. So what do you feel like has been the biggest reason for the inconsistency and lack of drive even come down to when it comes to the closing part of this season?
Yeah, it is strange because this team has performed well in clutch situations typically. So it's like they do sort of recognize when they need to turn it on. The odd thing this year is that they've thought they're better than they are. And so this entire season, they've kind of been sleepwalking and then thinking that's good enough. And it's not. I mean, you look up and down their schedule and results from this season. It's hard for me to believe that we've actually found 40 wins in there because it's you look at some of the teams they've lost to, it's remarkable. And not only that, look, this Toronto team, I know there's some strange circumstances from these 6 games, but the Heat are 0-3 against Chicago and 1-2 against Toronto. And those are 2 potential play-in opponents if the Heat don't get out of the play-in. So you asked Jonathan about lack of consistency. It's a lot of factors. I mean, when you're not shooting the ball well, you're going to be inconsistent. The weird part is why they've shot so poorly this year, because they're getting open looks, but they're not making them at a high rate. But the bigger concern lately is the defense has been inconsistent. And not just inconsistent, it's been without force. They're not dictating to opponents. And I thought Alex Toledo, Tropical Blanket, handled this really well on our podcast, where he basically pointed it to Kevin Love, as for the drop-off, but not because Love's done anything awful, but because the Heat basically changed their defensive scheme to accommodate him, and it hasn't worked out very well. So a lot of reasons for inconsistency, but this is basically a slightly above-average basketball team, but that's about as far as I can go.
Yeah, and getting to Toronto, they're a team that has kind of turned it around a little bit towards the end of the season. I mean, at home, their last 10 games, 9-1 at home over their last 10. So they've been playing really well. Guys like Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet have all been averaging almost 20 points a game over the last couple weeks. So those guys have been all dangerous. So out of those couple guys, of course, Scotty Barnes is someone who can always go off as well. Gary Trent is questionable tonight, but of those 4 guys, which one do you feel is the most dangerous coming into tonight's game?
Well, the Trent thing matters. We'll see if he plays because I feel like 2 of the last 3 times the Heat have played Toronto, Toronto hasn't had any of its shooters, which really changed the way that the game was played. I mean, most dangerous to me is going to be Siakam, just because he's the most overall skilled. Anunoby's terrific. I obviously advocated for the Heat to make a push for him. Didn't think he was really going anywhere, but the addition they made. I mean, they added Jakob Poeltl, as I never pronounce his name correctly, but as a starting center now, they're good. Like they're. It was surprising to me that they struggled as much as they did early this season, considering you have Barnes on the rise and you still had Van Vliet, Siakam, and Anunoby as a core there, and they've got other good players on that roster too. So this is not an easy game for the Heat. Toronto's length tends to give them a lot of problems, and I don't know what to make of the Heat right now. I was at Family Fest on Sunday. It's a joyous event. You don't talk a lot of basketball, but I got a chance to talk to a couple guys on the side, and I think they're just confused. They don't know how they can play so well in one half and play so poorly in the next half. Except, like you said, it's a lack of consistency from a lack of concentration, maybe a little bit of lack of effort, a whole bunch of things, but it just hasn't worked out very well.
So for me, I'm actually going to take Fred Van Vliet as the most dangerous guy. Obviously, with the Heat's point of attack defense, I feel like that's always something that you kind of have to watch out for. And of course, Coach Spo does usually a good job of cutting off small point guards, but it's usually when they're the focal point of the team. When you have a team like Toronto where they don't necessarily have a single focal point on offense, it's a little bit harder to cut that off. Obviously, like you said, Pascal Siakam's a great player. I think Bam almost always has his number defensively, though. So I do expect to see that tonight. Fred Van Vliet's been a guy who's been over the last month shooting 40% from three. So I feel like, with that coming in, that's on 9 attempts a game too. He'll pull that trigger. So I feel like with that coming in, I think he is the guy that could be the most dangerous if he even just comes a little bit more hot than that. So I feel like that coming in, I'll probably take Fred Van Vliet there. But let's get to our prize picks, guys. Like I said, make sure you guys use that promo code 5. So that way we'll match your initial deposit up to $100. So I'm going to log in and I'm going to go ahead and pull up the board for us right now. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
But the Heat have been tough to play lately. I tell you, and that's the reason we recommend with Prize Picks, look around the board. Just because the Heat are playing doesn't mean that's the team you need to take. I will say this: when I looked earlier, Jimmy Butler was not on the board for tonight yet. So some of the other numbers are a little bit inflated. We should probably give the injury report. Kyle Lowry is expected to play. Cody Zeller is expected to play, but it looks like Lowry won't play in New York because he hasn't been cleared for back-to-backs. Jimmy Butler was probable for this game, so we're anticipating he plays. But again, he was not. I don't see him anywhere, right, Jonathan? Maybe as we get a little closer to game time, when this repurposes tonight, he'll be there. I did see Hero at 21.5. What do you think?
I think that's a good number. I mean, actually, thinking about it, it's tough, right? Because Toronto is actually a really good defensive team. I think they're like top 7 or top 8 in defense. They have a lot of good wing defenders. So, I mean, if you have anybody outside of Fred Van Vliet guarding Tyler Hero, it's pretty much going to be a really tough matchup because, it's tough for him. So, I mean, honestly, I would just kind of stay away from that one. I mean, Tyler is going to get points up or he's going to get the volume up regardless. But I think the safer bet with a defensive team like Toronto would probably be staying away from that one. But
anything else you like on the board there? Because I had a little difficulty finding it just because some of these guys. Because again, I think this is being played some of the numbers were posted in the event that Jimmy didn't play.
Right. I do like the Bam over 8.5 on the rebounds. I do think this is one of those teams. Like you said, of course they have Jakob Poeltl on the center, but they have a very they're tall, but they're not bulky when it comes to their centers. Bam can kind of overpower that, get that box out, get that good positioning in. So I do see him going over on the rebounds. Let's take a look at some of the props for Toronto and see maybe we can get some from on there. All right.
Also, there is a Steph Curry prop on the board tonight that everybody should know about. You get 15% off with him, which is always helpful. I think he's at 23.5 tonight against New Orleans. Yeah. Team he typically plays well against, so just that might be one you want to flag there for your picks.
So we throw that in our over right there. So it's 2
there
picks. You go. So Toronto, they have Fred Van Vliet. How has his turnovers been lately? Let me take a look at that. Because I always like picking whenever the opposing team's point guard is playing against us, I like taking the over
Yes.
on the assists because typically Jimmy will try to, play safety and get on from
Mm-hmm.
there. So how do you feel about the 2.5 turnovers for Fred VanVleet?
I might stay away from that one. I think if you're looking Van Vliet, the ones that I was looking at, points and assists, 28.5. I honestly, I know you discussed it. I would go under on that, actually. I would go under on the 28 points and assists. I was looking also before some of the Siakam props. I would play Siakam over tonight. And then as far as the Heat go, I would wait to see if Jimmy gets put on the board because it's kind of unusual. We know he's playing tonight. We believe he's playing tonight, so that he wasn't on the board there. I guess, Jonathan, as we pivot, this is a huge game for a lot of reasons. Obviously, they got to get both on this trip. I mean, they got to get the game against New York. Also, they got a reeling Dallas team coming in here this week. This is one of those games where I feel like the Heat will fight and lose. Like I do think they'll come out with some fight after what happened the other night. We know it's always emotional when Lowry's going back to Toronto, and so that's happening again. At least it's not the first time. But I just honestly, as good as the Heat's clutch play has been this season, Toronto has always given them trouble in those situations because they make it hard to get to your shots because of their length. And I can see the Heat losing a close one tonight. And then get everybody excited by beating the Knicks in New York. How do you see it?
No, I'm actually right there with you. Like you said, the defense of Toronto, they're one of the rare teams that give Jimmy a little bit of trouble. Like when you have OG on him, like OG is a really good defender that you can put on Jimmy. He's one of the maybe, 5 or 6 guys that you can kind of leave him on an island and won't lose all those matchups compared to most guys. So I feel like you said, this is going to be a tough matchup for Miami because even if Jimmy wants to take over, it's a hard team to take over against. And I think that Toronto, with the amount of different players, like I said, I think they have 5 or 6 guys averaging double digits, and I think 4 of them are 17 plus. So with the stretch that Toronto has been on lately, 9-1 over the last 10 at home, I do think Toronto gets it done as well. I obviously would love for Miami to get it done. Toronto's only 3 games behind Miami as well. So, that's an interesting little caveat coming into this as well. So, obviously I hope Miami gets it done, but if I were to put my money on it, I would probably take Toronto.
It's a good point. I mean, the 7 is not guaranteed. Even if, you don't want the 7, you want the 6, but 7's not guaranteed either. You still got Atlanta, Toronto, Chicago all in the mix there. All right, for Jonathan and I kind of co-hosted this thing today. You can follow Jonathan at 3-Piece Combo and all the time on pregame shows. We'll have playback during the game tonight, and then also spaces at halftime on Twitter, and then a post-game show that we've got. Brian Fonseca will be one of those joining us tonight. Check out Mark Brown. PA.com, 954-566-5678.
And use that promo code 5 for prizepicks.com. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys.
Latest episode of 5 on the Floor in the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app. We're now on Red Circle as well as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Also, the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like and subscribe there. 5reasonsports.com. We do not have a paywall. Spell that one out. And check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We mentioned our gambling partner and our fantasy partner. Our gambling partner is betteredge.com. This is legal in the state of Florida and 43 other states because you are betting against others on the app. You are not betting against the app itself. And so that's very different from everywhere else. And also it means you can find the line that you want. So check it out. BetterEdge, it's with an O, betteredge.com. Again, use the code 5RSN there to get $20 to play. That's the number 5RSN. And use the code 5, that's just FIVE at prizepicks.com. Number 1 fantasy property out there right now. Check it out. They've been our partner for the last 2 years. We've signed up a lot of people, and now we're telling you how to play. So go to prizepicks.com, use the code 5, FIVE, and get your initial deposit matched up to $100. And now, tonight's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Yeah. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Brady Hawk will be back on some episodes over the course of this week. The Miami Heat getting ready to play the Toronto Raptors, going up to Toronto, a 2-game trip in Toronto and New York. If Miami had actually beaten the Nets the other night, this thing would look a whole lot different because they would be in position maybe to even pass the Knicks or at least tie them. Now, it doesn't look like that'll be the case on Wednesday, but they still got to get the game Tuesday, and they got to get it because of something Tyler Hero said in the locker room the other day. He says, we don't see ourselves as a play-in team. We want to get out of the play-in. And he said that after they played in a way that made it seem like they didn't even deserve to be in the play-in, Greg. So now they're in a situation where they're trying to get out of this play-in spot, trying to pass the Nets. They're not going to have the tiebreaker against the Nets. And you have to actually start worrying about what's below them, including Toronto, because a couple of the teams that they could play here, they are 1-2 against Toronto this season, and they are 0-3 against Chicago. They are 3-1 against Atlanta, but they haven't even played that well against this group of teams, Greg. So if they end up in the play-in at 7, there's no guarantee they're going to get out of the play-in to even get a shot at a Boston or a Philadelphia in a real first round.
It's so true. And I think that there's a couple layers to this. One, for this team to have a puncher's chance at doing anything that makes any of us say, okay, this season was worth all of that pain and struggle as we trudged the road through the regular season. It's getting to that 6 seed, getting a matchup against a team like Philadelphia, or maybe even a Boston, who more and more weird stuff comes out around that team. And I just begin to lick my chops at what could become a weird circumstance in Boston if they don't advance. That's another show. Anyway, I think the 6th spot is the sweet spot, right? So it's getting out of the bracket with these other teams. I think ultimately, you know what? We probably all agree that they could probably beat Atlanta in a playing game. They haven't played those other 2 teams particularly well. But I don't know that any of us are signing up to say that they can beat any team 4 out of 7 games as presently constructed, the way that they've been approaching big games like the one they lost against Brooklyn. They look like they turn a corner and then they don't. They look like they turn a corner and then they don't. And so like that's the theme that comes over and over again. To me, they have to try to avoid the play-in because of the nature with which you can just completely, if you don't bring it that night, you're done. It's got a little bit of NCAA March Madness feel to it. And usually I would say that actually would be a good thing to put the Heat under that kind of pressure. I don't know that right now that they have the fortitude mentally and just the way the season has gone. It's been too inconsistent for me to say that they are ready to really go through that gauntlet and then face a team in the first round and put up any level of a fight worth talking about. So they got to avoid the play-in. And luckily there are some games here that they can do it against, but to your point, Ethan, we don't know what this team is going to bring night over night. So we don't really know if some of the games we think are going to be easy wins coming up are going to necessarily be easy wins. So that's where this gets weird projecting forward.
And also, when you talk about the play-in, it's a situation where if you're in the 7 versus the 8, you get a second opportunity there. But like we talk about, I don't trust this team, and especially against some of these teams. I mean, the losses to Chicago haven't all been bad in different ways. And we know that Toronto, Alex, is the type of team that gives Miami trouble with their length, with the way that they've guarded Tyler at times. They have some scorers there. Obviously, they have some championship and playoff experience there with Siakam and Van Vliet. Like, that's not a guarantee that you're going to beat those teams. Because, again, the Heat have – it's funny to me as I was going through their schedule and results today and just looking at what they've done against certain teams, I'm like, where did all the wins come from? Because there's so many bad losses in there. Would you fear Toronto, Chicago, or Atlanta in a one-game situation with Miami?
Not fear. I don't think it would be fear, but it would be worry. Sort of, right? Because like what Leif was talking about there, I just think that sort of scenario, that March Madness scenario in one game, yes, the Heat would probably be sharper than they are in some of these regular season games versus subpar teams. But yes, like that doesn't also necessarily mean that they're going to win. Like it's just a little bit too risky. And yes, they would have the second chance, like you mentioned there. So as long as they finish with the 7th seed, it's more like a 2-game thing for them. So you just hope that they can win 1 out of 2. So that's the good thing. But regardless, they should be above that. Like they were the team that was the number 1 seed last season. Obviously, things have changed since then, but this team that has made 2 deep playoff runs should be above playing in the play-in. But when you look at the other teams, like there's some talent there. I don't think you fear them, but they have enough talent to beat the Heat. When you look at the Bulls, when you look at the Raptors, and then the Hawks to a lesser extent, because I just think they kind of have the Hawks figured out. Maybe I'm just biased because of what happened in the last playoffs and the way that they beat the Hawks this season. I'm biased as to what I've actually seen, whereas you kind of have to imagine it more with the Raptors and Bulls because they just haven't won more often versus those teams this season. I think those teams have guys who could really kill you in a 1-game sample. When it comes to the Bulls guys, for example, DeRozan and Levine, you can imagine them lighting up the Heat. We've seen Vucevic light up the Heat when he was an Orlando Magic guy, and that's just an example. So I wouldn't pick those teams over the Heat, but it's definitely possible. And it's not fear, but it's like, it's not confidence either.
Well, it shouldn't be confidence because, again, this team has proven they can lose to just about anybody. I think when you look at a play-in situation for this team, you say in the past, this would benefit Miami. You have Eric Spoelstra, who's a great 1-game coach. You have Jimmy Butler, who's a great 1-game player. But if they go out and they shoot 8 of 28 from 3, they lose. They are so dependent on whether or not they can actually shoot league average. They don't have any chance to win games unless they do. And so could they go 2 games where they just don't shoot the ball very well? Absolutely. And it's funny. I was at Family Fest yesterday. I got a chance to talk to a couple of the players on the side a little bit, and they talked about this challenge. And they're like, I would say, one of the players said to me, he said, I would tell you we were going to win all 7, but you wouldn't believe it. And I think that's kind of where we're at, is that there's just not a level of trust that this team, A, can rip off a long winning streak, which is why they're in this position of possibly being in the play-in. But also in a 1-game scenario, you just don't know what team's going to come out. In fact, it's a 1-quarter scenario. I mean, Greg, that was as well. We talk about that Nets game. That was as well as he can possibly play. And I thought, in terms of their ball movement, in terms of just, again, their focus, their execution, finishing possessions, that was as well as they could play. And yet, by the time they got to halftime, they were only up 4, and they were giving up every open shot on the other end. And I'm like, if that's as well as they can play and they come out of a half by 4, I can't trust them to win any 1 game against anybody.
I know. And, this is another part of this that I think the big picture heads out there that identify with this line of thinking will understand where I'm going with this. Like, there's also an element of this, if you don't think that this Miami Heat team necessarily has a shot of making a run deep into the playoffs or to the finals or the conference finals or to the title, whatever. If you don't think that that's what's happening right now, then this is a major evaluation period for, I believe, Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero as playoff performers. And so I'm interested to see how they balance that in a play-in scenario where I think ultimately Jimmy Butler is conditioned to take over in these moments. And I think that that's what you want to happen because he's that good a player. So it'll just be interesting because it's not going to be about stats. It's going to be about moments. It's going to be about matchups. It's going to be about how players make adjustments, because it can't all be about stats. Let me tell you, if Jimmy is getting 43, 11 and 12, you're not going to have 2 other guys that have 26 and 29 in a game 4, game 5, or a game 6 of a playoff series. Stuff shrinks down. And so I'm interested to see how they evaluate those 2 guys going forward as Udonis continues to harp on Bam and Tyler being the guys he's handing this franchise to as he says goodbye, as it's also the end of this little celebratory Udonis Haslem moment that we're having throughout the league and with the Miami Heat.
Well, and I wasn't surprised he said that yesterday. at least the Bam part. First thing, Bam was right behind him. We did this in 601 at the arena after they did the check ceremony for Family Fest. And so Udonis was waiting for Bam to finish speaking. And so, again, I wasn't surprised he mentioned Bam. Whenever someone in the organization mentions Tyler, it hits a little different because Bam has not been in any trade rumors, right? Bam is solidified as a piece of the franchise going forward. Tyler, it kind of seems like sometimes yes and sometimes no, and it kind of depends on who's out there and how much his name is out there and all that. So for Udonis to mention Tyler, particularly because, again, Udonis has taken Bam under his wing in part because all of the bigs in franchise history, the great bigs, Bosh, Zoe, UD, they all did, okay, because Bam was the next in their line. But for him to mention Hero was something a little bit different. I don't hear him say that as much, even though I know he has great fondness for Tyler. So you're right. This is a referendum in large degree on the two of them. But one of the things I want to get into on the other side of this, and then we're going to look at the schedules and see where they actually may end up, is that I do think the evaluations are different for a one-game play-in situation than they are for a playoffs series, okay? In the sense of, in a one-game situation to get out of the play-in, I think this team is more reliant on Jimmy Butler because you're not going to be able to wait to see if Hero's consistent or Bam is aggressive that night. Jimmy almost has to do it. A playoff series is a little different. You know Jimmy's going to prepare for it. You know what he's done in playoff series, but it's more spread out. There can be a Bam game. There can be a Tyler game. There's ebbs and flows to a series. Play-in's not that. Play-in, to me, is give the ball to Jimmy and get the hell out of the way. All right, do want to talk about a couple other sponsors here at the 5 Reasons Sports Network and of 5 on the Floor. We mention our friend all the time, Eric Rubenstein. Go to ericrubenstein.com. Excuse me, that's ericrubenstein.com. He's a personal injury attorney, can handle your slip and fall. If you have a traffic accident, any of that kind of stuff, he's the guy to go to. Huge Miami Heat fan. You see him down there at all the games. You can also find him on Instagram and ask about me. I got you. Or phone number 954-829-ERIC. That's 954-829-ERIC, the official personal injury attorney of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. And also, this is not a sponsor, but we just wanted to mention this one. We're going to be doing playback again on Tuesday and on Wednesday. Greg's on there. I'm going to be on there. These are road games. I'll be on playback for both of them. Check it out. It's a great experience. You got the stream right there, and you can mute them and listen to us, or you can mute us and listen to them. You just shoot the bleep with us. So go to playback.tv/5 on the floor, playback.tv/5 on the floor, and get our upcoming schedule there. So do you agree with before we get into the schedule going forward, do you agree with my basic premise here, Alex, that if they're in a play-in situation, that it's going to all fall on Jimmy?
I think it probably, yeah. I think I agree that, just when you go to a one-game sample like that, they're probably just going to lean on their best player. And, you just got to go with your most surefire option, even though they have good ones. Like, I was looking up Tyler's clutch true shooting because I know there was talk about that. It's awesome. It's like 63. And, they have just a huge sample of those this season. So it's more than enough. Not that Tyler should be the number one. That's not what I'm saying at all. But just that they have guys with Tyler and guys like Bam who can also bring some other stuff. But I do agree that ultimately most of the plays are probably going to be made by Jimmy Butler.
I'm with you. And I think that as we look, Greg, at this team going forward, that's the major reason that I want to see them get in the playoff series. Because I feel like a play-in situation, we're going to draw all of these conclusions off of one game or 2 games. And I don't think that there's going to be anything learned, honestly, because, in those kind of games, it's everybody, you just Spo throws everything at it. But again, you throw it at Jimmy. This team, I think, and they've been able to make some of their evaluations, obviously, over the course of this sort of rocky season. This team needs a playoff series to see where some of these guys are, to see how they handle being down 2-1, to see how they handle, having, whole quarters where they're not the focus, to see if Hero can come back from what happened in the playoffs last year, and to some extent, Bam. That's why this is necessary. I don't think at this point it's necessary. This is why I'm with you on the Tyler Bam thing. I don't think it's as necessary for the Gabe Vincents, Max Struess's, Caleb Martins. I think that this team kind of recognizes what the ceilings are there and what they aren't. But with Bam and Tyler, we don't know what their playoff ceiling is at this stage.
Yeah. And what's unfortunate, though, is that if this team is not necessarily, let's just say, spiritually in line to make a deep run, then you're actually not really giving Tyler that honest deep run in the playoffs as a healthy player. And obviously also Bam Adebayo. I don't care what anyone says. He had huge games in the conference finals last year. Like, look it up. I don't need to let myself do a bunch of the talking, but I understand that there were games where he also could have done more. I think sometimes also reference to those games when you see guys going nuclear. You don't remember in game 1 of the Boston Heat Eastern Conference Finals last year that Bam, I think, probably had single digits in game 1 because Jimmy scored 40 or whatever. Like, sometimes that's just the way games happen, and you still, because it's a victory, it's okay. So I think that we need to understand that. So it's less about Bam. It was more about Tyler. Here's the unfortunate part of all of this. I don't know that they're going to be the type of team that's making the type of run that is valuable enough to make any kind of firm declaration, which leads me back to saying that they likely probably already know what time it is. And it would take a remarkable run that would buck every trend, and this team would completely reverse course in terms of its consistency, its disposition, game in and game out, night in and night out. Like, that would all have to change so drastically to convince me that they would think that this is going to continue to work going forward, that I think it's inevitable that we're going to land at a spot where, other than Jimmy and Bam, everybody is up for a conversation.
And I think you're right that they know what time it is, and that the hands of time would have to be changed considerably by some of these guys. I don't think this team is just going to all of a sudden grow a disposition that it hasn't had all season. I think it's going to come down to matchups on whether or not they can advance. And it's also going to count on whether the fact that, again, Hero and Bam are playing at a high level and doing it consistently and picking up some of the burden from Jimmy. I just that though is, as we close here, and thanks to our sponsors, Prize Picks, Better Edge, and also EricRubenstein.com. That I just keep coming back to this. This season's not going to end in a championship. It's probably not going to end in a conference finals. It's not going to be a season that everybody remembers. That's why kind of Family Fest, as great as it was, and I appreciate, again, the Heat putting that on and inviting the media to it. It was a good time. But it just had a weird vibe this year. First thing, they hadn't had a Family Fest in 4 years, but typically I was talking to Heat people. I'm like, I can't remember the last time they lost in the game right before a Family Fest, and especially to lose that way. And I don't know, it felt like this sort of weird celebration of a team that kind of knows that it's not going to be together very long. And then, nobody in the front office, well, in terms of at least Pat Riley spoke to the media, but we were told no basketball questions. So it just feels like everybody's kind of waiting to get to the off season, but you would at least like to have a playoff series and see if this team can summon something we haven't seen all year. 1 or 2 games out in the play-in.
Only in the clutch.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to wonder why we spent 100 podcasts handling this team. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Again, playback tomorrow on Heat Raptors, Heat Knicks after that. Miami needs both of these if they're going to have a shot at the 6th seed. So we'll see how that plays out. This whole thing may come down to the Nets and Sixers last game of the season, if Philadelphia needs that game or not. That may be the position that we're in as we head up to it. And we'll obviously have a lot of coverage for you between now and then. Have a good night, everybody.